Hey podcaster, I'm Tim Wahlberg, your podcast performance coach, with another actionable tip so you can sound like a pro and gain more podcast fans. Today's tip is all about sharing. Maybe you've heard that sharing is caring. Well, I want to turn that phrase around a little bit when it comes to your podcast. Sharing can make your listeners care more about you because they can relate to you better. Most listeners of Pat Flynn of the Smart Passive Income podcast probably know that he has a wife and kids. Why? Because he's told you that more than once on his show. And who knows that Mark Maron records his WTF podcast out of his garage? Most of his listeners know it because he tells you. It doesn't take much to create a bond with an individual, and that's why I strongly believe in sharing personal details about yourself with your listener in your podcast. Have you ever been to a party or gathering where you didn't know anyone else in the room? Depending on how outgoing you are may determine how comfortable you feel, but for a lot of people, it's hard to engage others in a room full of strangers. For me, I head straight to the food table. At least I'm going to meet someone who is just as hungry or just as bored as I am. Perfect! I already have two things in common with them. Next thing you know, I'm comparing these cute little tomatoes they have on the table to the ones that I grow in my garden at home. What? You grow tomatoes too in your garden at home? No way! Where do you live? My mom lives near you. Blah, 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 blah. I just connected with someone. Think about it when you're doing your podcast. With each new piece of information you share about yourself with your listener, you're allowing them an opportunity to connect with you. I believe you should be sharing at least one thing about yourself in each episode. If you can tie that personal factoid into the topic of your episode, perfect. That's the best way to do it because it sounds like content. Don't just throw out, and now about me. I'm not a fan of dogs or cats. I'm more of a plant person. It's gotta fit, right? How personal you want to get is completely up to you. It'll likely be determined by your subject matter and your personal experiences. But if it's relevant, it may be helpful to your listener. One of my clients has a weight loss podcast. You better believe it's personal. Weight loss is personal. He shares everything. And because he's had all the same struggles in the past his listeners are currently going through and experiencing, he's got an instant connection. If I was doing a podcast on welding, you might not get so personal, but I still want to get to know who's talking to me every week about everything welding. Even the fact that his dog likes to catch the sparks when he's welding in his garage is cool to know, because now I'm picturing him and his dog in my mind. These kinds of details will only deepen your connection. Throughout the duration of my show, Just the Tip, you may have learned that I used to be in radio in the Vancouver market in Canada over 20 years. I'm married, I record my podcast in my bedroom office, just like some of you do, and I have some crazy dude who hangs out in my bedroom and shouts things out every once in a while.
How? Why?
That guy.
Why? How?
He's referring to episode 14. Mastering open-ended questions, where I tell you how and why to use how and why in your podcast. Now, what you may not know about me is that I rarely record my show wearing pants. I hate pants. And you guessed it, I'm not wearing pants right now, but not really relevant to you because this show isn't about pants, it's about podcasting. This sharing technique also works incredibly well if you have a guest. Usually when you share something personal to your guest, they in return will likely share an experience or tidbit back. It may be as simple as sharing what kind of car that they drive. Sharing breaks down the barriers and opens them up to having deeper conversations, which ultimately makes for a better podcast. Whether it's you or your guest that shares, you no longer are this disembodied voice in your listener's ears. You're human. You're relatable. You're a real person. This all helps to level the playing field and shorten the gap between you and your listener. Besides sharing too much of oneself, the only other caution I have for you would be to steer clear of topics like politics and religion, unless of course it's relevant to your show. Then, go nuts. So in your next podcast, share more about you. You never really know what's going to stick to a listener. However, the better that connection your listener has to you as a host, the more memorable you are, the bigger fans they become, and the better your chances are of having them subscribe, share, and participate in your community. And I hope that's just the tip you need. By the way, if I can share one more thing with you, it has to do with my studio. I have little reminder posters everywhere. They surround my mic, my monitors, and my bedroom, and my wife loves it. She hates it. Signs like, shut up, smile, slow down, and share. These are great performance reminders while you're recording your podcast, and you can have them if you want. You can get all of my signs when you sign up for my 25-point pre-record checklist. A great tool to create awesome habits when you're recording your podcast. And you can get that at podcastperformancecoach.com. I'm Tim Walberg. See ya!